Let's talk about using color in CSS. This is really one of the most critical things about CSS, is really being able to make things visual. We really want to focus on making color. We really want to focus on making things beautiful. And so what we want to do in our style guide before we start doing anything is establish our color palette. We would begin to really use it when we want to colorize colors or backgrounds. And in CSS, there's two ways of displaying color. There's actually an ability of using hex code in CSS, a six letter and numeric combination to come up with colors. There's a lot of libraries out there online that we can look at to pull a hex code. You might use one out of Photoshop. You might use one on Illustrator. If you were handed the design, more than likely what you'll do is actually open the design in an application like Photoshop, go through the colors, and actually figure out the hex code value. There's also a way of using RGB. We'll talk about that further in the next chapter. But the first one, what we want to do is look at series of colors. I use color two ways. I use color to get an exact, definite sense of what color palette we're going to use. And I also use color to help me move things around. So the first thing what we're going to do is let's use the background. We'll use body. And as you notice, you've seen me use a background tag. I'm going to create the background tag, and we're just going to use it to just see how color works. So I'm going to come back here. I'm going to save it. You notice I've left it in my main.css in my style guide. I haven't added any HTML code, but now I'm actually going to go back to my different browsers. I'm going to go back to Safari. I'm actually going to open up my editing tool as I have these three browser windows. I have Firefox, Chrome, and Safari all at the same time. So let's open up our text editor. Let's go back to Sublime. I'm going to get out of full screen mode. And so now what I can do is let's use a hex code. Let's use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You notice the color comes in. I save it. And now I can reload in the different pages. It is actually a blue color. And what do you know? The colors match perfectly. When we're using typical hex code, and what I mean is by that set of thousands of colors, I'll actually open up here. Let's go www in my browser. Hex codes is we have an HTML color picker. If I remember, I think there's about 250 color streams in here, but we've added more and more as the browsers got in, different hues and variation. The goal of HTML colors is that the hex codes will look exactly the same across three different browsers. So let's use 999CF. Different, if you notice that there is a pattern, if you go from color variation to numbers, certain numbers and letters change hues and values. So there's a difference between 3333FF, 3366FF. Literally these colors and values represent different shades. The real power, again, is consistency. So let's use this color up here, 999FF. I'm going to go back to my text editor. I'm going to double click and save it here. I'm going to save again. Let's reload all our browsers. I'm going to find my other browser in between, somewhere here. Again, be careful. We're going to have piles and piles of windows all over the place. That looks really consistent. Now, if we actually want to get into really, really specific colors, then we can actually get really into using the eyedropper feature to get actually very specific hues. One of the things that I do warn you, if you're using cross-platform against Mac and PC and you're working things that are not hex colors, you might get some slight variation on color. So that's one thing you have to remind yourself. It really has to do about how one platform or another views colors. If you're using the web-safe colors, which is that first set of 256, if you're using the next set, which are these millions of hex codes that we're able to use in this color picker, this will still work really well. So that's one of the things of words of warning when dealing with color. I said there was two other ways that I use, especially with the style guide. One of the other ways that I use is instead of using hex code, if I'm still beginning to lay out and experiment with things, first thing I'm going to do is I can use the simple code red. Red, blue, yellow, white actually pulls up the red value within the browser. So again, it's a generic color, but the reason I use the generic color is if I'm working to make sure, first thing, that I'm actually establishing that the CSS works, I'm going to use something like red. You're going to notice that I have a variant on border that I use all the time. I'll talk about it when we get to borders. I'll talk about it when we're creating shapes. I always use a generic color to make sure that I'm actually in the right place, I'm affecting the right CSS element, and I'm also affecting the right page. So let's go with color. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to focus on the color attribute, and what we've been talking about, hex codes or the values. And I'm also going to look at using it. So notice we can use color for backgrounds. In this case, I use FFFF for white. That way I know that the page is always white, especially if I'm creating a background, or 00000 for black. If we're using something like 66666 or 55555, where I'm using the actual same characters and digits across, I can actually shorten them to using 3 digits, and I get the same effect. So I can use FFF, that's white. If I want to use 111, that is also a very, very dark color. So let's try. That is a gray. 333, that's going to be a lighter gray, or a darker gray, sorry. And my favorite is EEE, which is a very, very, very light gray. There you go, that you can barely notice. Here it is, my light gray against the white is really, really noticeable. Again, these values are really simple, but again, there are things that we can use just to start working. And again, let's change this so that you see my sample of the letters to yellow. You don't want to be using yellow and red or black and white, because some browsers or older browsers might not understand that. So you really want to use hex codes. If you really, really want to be safe, you want to use 6 digits. But most modern browsers, if we've written our non-functional spec correctly, will use the shortened hex codes. Now, if we're going to apply it, let's go back to, let's say, white. If I'm going to set up a color, and let's say I'm going to set up a color on a bold tag, and maybe on a class. So I'll call this color. I'll actually say color. This is the color attribute. I had a colon, and notice the semicolon actually came in. And the color here will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, a nice random number of digits. I'll come back here, nothing happens. So now what we'll do is we'll add in a bold tag in HTML. Of course, good old HTML likes open and close brackets. And so let's say this is bold colored text. Can I open it? I had a front slash, I had a B. Let's also do the same thing with maybe a paragraph. And in this case, I'll add in a class, and I'll put in my class called color. I reload it. It's really, really hard to tell against black, against the white background. So what am I going to do? And of course, this one doesn't have the attribute, so I'm going to, of course, copy it in. Of course, it's a little tough to read, just to make sure that I've got the right thing and I'm not driving myself crazy. What do I do as a test? I do red, and there you go. I've been able to change it. If I was going to use red, then I can actually use the hex code value of red. I'm going to go back to that page that I had for hex code pickers. I'll go under red. It is FF00. Make sure that you always have a hashtag or a pound sign in front of it. And voila, we now have hex code color in it. Moving forward in the style guide, if I wanted to create a specific style for color, what I want to do is I want to be very, very specific on my classes. Don't really leave anything to the imagination. If you know that you want to create this color red, create a class called red. If it's a paragraph, let's say I have a special, I don't know, I'm thinking maybe I want to make a paragraph that's red. Let's be really, really specific. It sounds really funny when I talk about it, and everyone says, well, Adrian, why are you so specific? But imagine this file is going to grow into about 200 to 300 lines of code. When someone looks at our style guide, they actually want to go through it and figure out exactly what you did. It'd be kind of funny if paragraph red opened up a yellow color. So you really want to be really consistent. A lot of times what I'll do is titles or any fonts, I'll call it title red, title blue, title spacing, etc., depending on what we have. So you, again, really want to be very specific. I also, again, try to match as much of my colors to hex codes as possible. Sometimes you won't be able to get that, but using a dropper in Photoshop, you'll be able to see the hex code value.